Welcome everyone. This is Editing Truth in the editing booth once again. I don't have a whole lot to say this time, except I need to once again remind everybody that I recorded this originally back in July. That reminder becomes more and more crucial the more time goes on without me finishing all the editing. I labeled this batch of manga one-shots, but half of them are short story collections and then half of them are actual single volume stories. But, that was just a convenient way to group them all together. So, without further ado, hope you enjoy the rest of the video. Now here's another cool thing that started coming out this year. The Tatsuki Fujimoto Before Chainsaw Man volumes. We got 2 of these in total. Having read both Fire Punch and Chainsaw Man, these were honestly pretty fascinating to read. I think Fujimoto is a really fascinating artist. Not just because of his illustration skills or anything like that, but just because there's this general atmosphere of subversion in all of his stories. In some of these you can kind of see the narrative through lines that would lead to things like Chainsaw Man and Fire Punch. But yeah, these are all just short story collections. And in his usual brief nature, Fujimoto gives a little note at the end of each story, which is no longer than this, just like a short paragraph, usually a sentence or two, and it's usually something along the lines of, somebody said to me that I could never write a story that does blank, and so I proved them wrong by writing this one. And, some of these are really great. Some of them are a lot more humorous than even Fire Punch or Chainsaw Man. It kind of makes me wish Fujimoto would lean more into comedy now and then. One of these stories is just about, a high school guy trying to confess his love to his high school girl classmate, and just all sorts of wacky things start springing up to sort of interrupt his confession. I cracked up at that series. I absolutely loved it. And then in the second book, there was a story called Woke Up as a Girl Syndrome, and it opens up with a doctor telling somebody, "You have woke up as a girl syndrome." To which they ask, "Is there a cure?" And he says, "There is no cure." It's just amazing. And it's a pretty funny, wacky short story, but also has some surprisingly profound things to drop along the way about gender identity and gender roles. I would say if you own either Chainsaw Man or Fire Punch, then you should pick these up as well. Part of me believes that Fujimoto does some of his best work in short story format, because you don't run that risk like you might with Fire Punch of getting 7 or 8 volumes in and then just being like, what the hell am I reading now? This is nothing like the beginning of the story. That said, that is not a criticism of Fire Punch. I love Fire Punch, but I could see some people having that experience. Another Junji Ito compilation came out this year. This one was called Tombs, and I liked this one quite well overall. This one was, a good batch of stories. I don't want to go into, super granular detail about each and every one in the book, mostly because I don't remember exactly which ones were in the book. I don't know, personally, I've read, a whole bunch of Junji Ito stories, and some of them, I can't remember which ones I read online, or which ones I read in one compilation versus another compilation. All of the, compilation books of his kind of blur together for me because I read them all. I will say, though, unlike the last compilation, The Liminal Zone, Tombs does not have a note from the author in the end of him saying, yeah, my heart really wasn't in these stories. I kind of think I'm running out of ideas. Sorry if you think this sucks. There's nothing like that at the end of Tombs. I also became aware recently And I want somebody to correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but I don't think the Enigma of Amigara Fault, one of his best known stories, has ever been put out in any of the English language story compilations of his. Again, I want to say I'm mistaken on that one, but like I looked through like every single story compilation of his that was like on the bookshelf in the manga cafe one day, and I didn't see it listed in any of them. It could be possible that it got like tacked onto the end of like Gyo or Tomie or something like that. Maybe it was included as a bonus story in one of those books. I didn't double check all of them, but I just checked the short story compilations and I didn't see that story in any of them. So like, if I'm wrong about that, somebody please correct me, but I feel like that would be a massive oversight for Viz or any other English publishers to have never included that in any compilation. And so just a couple more now. I read a one-shot that was called Wolverine Snikt. This was, well, I guess it's kind of a manga? I don't know. The artist who made it is Tsutomu Nihei, who is pretty well known in the manga world. He made, Blame, I think, which I haven't read, and he made a short, like, sort of sci-fi horror series called Abara, which I did read, and I liked that pretty well. Mostly I just, like, really love his art style, and so I kind of looked forward to this Wolverine graphic novel that he put out, but I read that, and I had kind of a rare experience where I realized that this had been colorized, and I kinda wish it hadn't been. Honestly, like, I wish it would have just been in the artist's original black and white. You can definitely tell it was colored by somebody else. I think it was probably colored by a team, because if I remember right, I think on the book itself it had like a studio credited rather than like an actual artist for the coloration. And I said to a friend of mine that it looks like an early 2000s comic, and not only that, it looks like an early 2000s comic that you wouldn't even buy on its own, but that would be like included as a free bonus if you bought like an X-Men video game. It's kind of a shame because if you look at the cover illustration, which is in the original black and white, and you look at some of the illustrations that they put in the back of the book of the uncolored pages, I was just like, wow, this looks so much better. There were kind of some weird choices in the coloration. Like, all of the characters were given just like plain white, completely pale faces in a way that looked weird. So like the shading on their faces would be gray instead of like a normal skin color. And I don't know, maybe the original artist intended for everybody to be gray, but if the illustrations had been left just black and white, that would not have been what I would have assumed. You actually do, like, kind of lose something in the coloration process with this one, because having read, like, just one of Nihei's books before, and just seen some of his art, I've noticed that he almost never uses tones for his shading in black and white illustrations, so it's almost completely just, like, pen strokes. And you lose that distinction in his art style in this very gradient-heavy coloration. And, if you're curious about the story, it is what it is, I guess. Basically, Wolverine gets pulled to a post-apocalyptic future by somebody who traveled back in time to get him, and they needed him to save the remainder of humanity by killing some robots. So he goes to the future and he kills the robots, and I guess they all lived happily ever after. It's nothing too involved, which I think is why the art has to be as good as possible. And it's like, I think if it had been in the original black and white, this might have been something I would buy. The coloration actually makes me less inclined to buy it. So, I don't know, I thought it was kind of a letdown, because I had seen the upcoming release of this book, and I recognized the artist, and I knew he was known for making like really great sci-fi horror illustrations, so I thought it would be really cool to see him take on another property that I was aware of in Wolverine or the X-Men. So I was pretty excited just for that, and I thought, you know, even if the story is no good, I know this artist is strong enough that I might like it just on the illustrations alone, and then just that color job kinda ruined that for me. Now, the last book that I read before July, or, well, technically I think I finished it on July 1st, it was this one, which I also bought. It's River's Edge by Kyoko Okazaki. I really liked this one a lot. It's just a single volume story. It's nothing like too long. And I had read her work before. I read a manga that she made called Helter Skelter. And I will say this about Helter Skelter, it wasn't my favorite, but it was very different from anything else I had read before, so it made it very memorable for me. And River's Edge I liked even more. I would say it's probably more accessible, I guess. Helter Skelter had a lot to do with like the fashion industry, and just kind of involved a world that I don't really know much of anything about. Whereas River's Edge had more of an ensemble cast of characters, and was pretty much, you know, just about high schoolers, and a lot of the heavy and fucked up shit that happens in their daily lives. So a kind of weird note about this book, this doesn't really, like, relate to anything, but I noticed as I was reading it that I think, like, the glue they used for the pages in this one has this, like, really strong, acrid smell, so it's like, ugh, if I get really close to it like that, it's just like, it really, like, punches you in the face. I don't know if that's just something weird about the volume that I bought, or if that's like all of them. I'd be curious to know if anybody else out there bought this book. Anyway, this is the kind of book I would recommend to you if you like artists like Inio Asano, or like Akane Torikai, who made Sensei's Pious Lie that I read last year. Maybe even some of that hard-hitting memoir manga like this would be a good kind of prep for a book like this. Because it's another story that deals with a lot of like heavy and very difficult topics, and a lot of subjects that you don't see a lot of people talk about in art, or especially in manga. So I really love it for that reason alone. It goes into a lot of sort of taboo subject matter, and offers a perspective that you don't tend to see in a lot of more mainstream manga. So for that alone, it is something really valuable. Like, I just read it very recently, and so I'm still kind of like digesting what I've read, but initial impressions are that I really love it a lot. This is probably going to be like a good 9 out of 10 for me. I gotta say, Okazaki in general has kind of a weirder art style than you might be used to if you've read a lot of like more mainstream manga, especially if you've read like, you know, the usual Shonen Jump fare, that sort of thing. It's almost like, I don't know, I would probably describe it as, I guess, less polished, but that really works in a way that suits the subject matter a lot more. If it was like the most extremely like detailed and cleanly polished and magnificent thing I'd ever seen, well, I mean, obviously I would love that, but also if it was like that, I feel like it would detract from the harshness of the subject matter that you have in this book. If this was illustrated like Witch Hat Atelier, just like completely beautiful and elegant and magnificently decorated on each page, I would be like, what the hell is this about? But no, really did love this one, would highly recommend reading it. and I will probably be reading more from this artist in the future as well. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Trooth's Manga Cafe. If you want to become a certified Trooth fairy, you can start giving me $1 on Patreon like these fine people have done. There are only 2 videos I still need to edit to finish out my summer recap. Until then, here's Charlie to talk about his favorite one-shot of the year.